would like to invite first our very dear Honorable Dr. Terrance Jew, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, who also doubles as the Minister of Finance of St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for joining us on this side. The next person we'll be inviting will be the Special Advisor to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on Finance and the Economy, Ms. Sanyade Okoli. Please, a warm round of applause for her as well. As she's taking her seat, we'd also want to invite the moderator for this session to also join us on this side, Mr. Peter Olowononi, Director, Client Relations, Anglo-West Africa, Afri-Caribbean Bank. Thank you very much for joining us. First, we'll start by having to bring us up to speed in an abridged form. The Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, who also doubles as the Honorable Minister of Finance. The Honorable Dr. Terrance Michael Jew currently serves as a Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and National Security, Citizenship and Immigration, Health and Human Resources Management and Social Security of St. Kitts and Nevis. Prime Minister Dr. Jew has provided years of dedicated service as a medical practitioner specializing in the field of internal medicine. He began his medical career as a general practitioner at the Joseph N. France General Hospital and later branched off into his own private practice. In June 2013, he became a member of the American College of Medicine and American Medical Association and is a diplomat of the American Board of Internal Medicine. He is often referred to as the caring Dr. Jew, as he has committed himself to creating environments of support and advancement. A community activist and a philanthropist by nature, Dr. Jew has been actively involved within society, providing dependable leadership on various community initiatives, including the empowerment of youth and marginalized groups such as the disabled and elderly. He believes in the development of our youth and has worked ardently since his acceptance of the office of service to the people to ensuring that young people are recognized and provided adequate opportunities to advance. Prime Minister Dr. Jew believes that they are stronger when we care. It was this belief, diligent efforts to building a personal relationship with the people within his community and attentiveness to their needs and concerns that led him to establishing the Compassionate Action to Reach and Empower, that is known as CARE Foundation, in February of 2021. I want to abridge it, but ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Honorable Dr. Terrance Jew, who currently serves as the lead head with responsibility of issues pertaining to human resource development, health, and HIV and AIDS in the CARICOM-COSI cabinet. And he is the Prime Minister as well as Minister of Finance of St. Kitts and Nevis. Please, a warm round of applause for him.
I'm also going to be introducing one of our panelists. Sanyade Okoli is a leading African finance expert with 3 decades of experience across policy advisory, financial advisory, private equity, corporate, commercial, and management finance, as well as auditing. She's currently the special advisor to the Nigeria's president on finance and the economy. She's resident in the office of the Honorable Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of the Economy, leading on the minister's economic coordination efforts and operating as chief of staff. Prior to that, she was the CEO of Alpha African Advisory Limited and also a trained transformational life coach focused on inner healing and restoration. Sanyade holds an MA in Mechanical Engineering from Cambridge University, UK. He's a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, England and Wales, and a fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, and a member of the Institute of Directors, Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, please a round of applause for Ms. Sanyade Okoli.
And now to the very distinguished moderator for the session. Peter Adeshola Olowononi is the head of client relations responsible for Anglophone West Africa, which comprises of Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Gambia, and Cape Verde at the African Export-Import Bank. He joined the African Export-Import Bank in July of 2015 as Manager Business Development, Anglophone West Africa region. He currently oversees client relations and is responsible for the execution of the business development plans encompassing trade finance, guarantees, specialized finance, advisory and capital markets, corporate banking, export development, and project financing. Peter holds a certificate in project management from the George Washington University, United States of America, certificate of finance in international trade from the University of Malta, and an MBA from the University of Lagos, Nigeria. He has vast experience in manufacturing, maritime, aviation, financial institutions, oil and gas industry. Peter has structured transactions and availed credit across the oil and gas upstream, midstream, and downstream value chain in excess of 15 billion US dollars in the last 10 years. To abridge his citation, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our very erudite moderator for this session, Peter Adeshola Olowononi. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good afternoon to the audience and Prime Minister. It's a pleasure. Sanyade, it's a pleasure to be taking on this panel. I think very clearly from all we've said yesterday, we can have all these ideas between the collaboration that Africa and the Caribbean should have, but if there is no finance, finance will definitely remain the legs, as we heard even just moments ago, and be the wings on which our collaboration and our partnership will thrive. We will not sell, you produce coconut, we have coconut. You have the sea, we have the sea, but manufactured exports, oil and gas, refined products, which are consumables, those are the kind of things that would drive trade between Africa and the Caribbean. And once we can have such a rich a bouquet of trade products, our economies can be more interrelated. And then we will start seeing people move from Africa to the Caribbean. We'll have enough people to fill a plane and create economies for airlines to want to actively create a direct route. So that's why this panel, the imperative of this panel is very clear, that we need to just discuss and understand the role of finance. We have a shared heritage. We have common challenges as to access to finance. And that's basically what we'll be espousing as we carry on this panel. Prime Minister, I'll start with you, given that you are both an economic head and a political head. And I will ask the easiest question. How has history, colonialism, slave trade, the unbalance, the misalignment in political architecture, how has it impacted access to finance in the Caribbean?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and to my fellow panelists. Thank you very much for being here, and to all of us who are here this afternoon, Madam President, listening to us. I think it's afternoon by now, is it? Yes. Let me say that is a very important question. Just to go back a bit in history, just so people understand how the Caribbean was formed. The Caribbean was originally inhabited by the indigenous people, specifically the Kalinagos in St. Kitts and Nevis. In the 15th century, we all know the famous story of Christopher Columbus, who set sail to find a new route to get Europe, not to pass through the Middle East, to get around to India. However, it is said that he came upon the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, they worked the indigenous people to death. In my country, they were totally annihilated. I only know of one person who survived from that time, from the Kalinagos. After they would have annihilated the Kalinagos, they then came to West Africa to trade with the African kingdoms, and part of that trade was the trade of people. And so they brought them over to the Caribbean to work on the sugarcane fields and the tobacco fields to create wealth for Europe. Why do I say all of that? To remind us that it were these small countries in the Caribbean, these islands, where Europe was able to accumulate its capital to fund the Industrial Revolution. I want to say that, and we must understand that. St. Kitts had become what you call the mother colony of the whole of Great Britain within the Caribbean region. And it was known to have very fertile soil. So the return from the sugar production was extremely high and extremely profitable to the United Kingdom or to England. And so England was able to even use that capital to spread effectively to other countries and eventually reach around to India. And we know what happened in India, and we also know what happened in Africa. So the story started in the 15th century on these Caribbean islands building wealth. Since that time, we went through colonization, emancipation, colonization, and lead to independence. And the independence uprising started in St. Kitts and Nevis again in the 1930s before the Second World War with the Buckley's uprising that led to the Moyne Commission, and it charted the way to independence, not just in the Caribbean, but all the way through Africa and around to India as well, if you look at the history. So it started in the Caribbean on both ends. That has left us with a colonial architecture in terms of finance, in terms of the political system. Unlike other nations that receive compensation and reparation to structure the economy, we were left with absolutely nothing. The Germans, after the Second World War, we know that they got compensation. The Japanese, they got compensation. We did not get any compensation as the indigenous inhabitants, or the inhabitants of St. Kitts and Nevis, rather. Do you know who got compensation for slavery in the Caribbean? The slave owners. England paid them when they had to leave the countries as compensation for the loss that they said they would have had by giving up their plantations and all of their holdings. It is a travesty. And I cannot speak to economic advancement and development and political advancement and development without understanding the context of the history. Now, understanding that and that backdrop with absolutely no help, with absolutely no investments, we had to declare our independence and chart our own course. And we are still suffering tremendously from that era of underdevelopment, that era where we lacked investments, that era where we were totally oppressed and suppressed. Nonetheless, just like Africa, we gained our independence and liberation. So now we are where we are. And so we are now trying to formulate a political structure, an economic structure that benefit our people. And so we have been going through a lot of transformation to ensure that we get to the point where our economies and our political structure would respond to our needs and not the needs of others. Our history is our history, not their history. Our political development is our political development. Therefore, whatever we develop must serve us. And we must reject the financial architecture that is to serve them. If you listen to the Prime Minister from Barbados, Mia Mottley, she has presented what is called the Bridgetown Initiative, which seeks to rupture the present financial architecture globally, which serves one set of people to the detriment of others, such as the Caribbean, Africa, and so forth. So we have to start there. What are the types of political structures and financial economic structures that we are going to put in place? Not just locally, but we're going to advocate and push for internationally so that those structures can respond to our needs. So I will let my first response to end there to say, based on our history and where we are now, What are we going to do to make sure that our political systems and our financial economic systems respond to our specific needs as people of the Caribbean and people of Africa?
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. And Sanyade, I think we'll just tie in very quickly to what he set the tone, he set the stage. And Nigeria, as a case study, I think we also have gone through our fair share. The structure of our economies were to produce, to feed factories in the West, from cocoa, sugar, rubber, oil and gas. But recently in Nigeria, we've seen how Nigerian entrepreneurs are basically stepping in and basically taking back this economic vehicles, basically to create a wealth for the people, create economic emancipation for the people to meet and ensure there's more wealth retained on the continent. If we take oil and gas, for example, we've seen Nigerian companies stepping into the role and buying out this international oil and gas companies. We're seeing our banking systems going to other African countries, taking and creating banking franchises across the continent. What would you say the government is doing? How has the reforms, what is the government doing deliberately, just as the Prime Minister have said, to ensure that we can catalyze wealth for our people and take back our economies for ourselves?
Yeah, I think it's on now. Okay, so thank you very much for that. I think, first of all, to say a huge congratulations to all the organizers for having put this most necessary conversation together. And a big welcome to the Prime Minister and all our other visitors from different parts of the Caribbean, African, etc. So speaking to your question, I know this is Afri-Caribbean and obviously African, but your question was specifically related to Nigeria, so I'll use that as permission to speak on Nigeria. So if I use our example, President Tinubu took up office on the 29th of May. But based on the work that he had done, himself and his team had done before, he had a good sense of the dislocations within our economy that were causing fiscal imbalances. So, for example, the fuel subsidy and the subsidy on foreign exchange. But we're also acting as economic impediments because for those who understood or understand the Nigerian economy, we had multiple foreign exchange rates. And what that did was investors could not come into the country because they would have to sell their FX at the lower rate. And then when they needed to buy anything, they'd have to do it at the higher rate. Local owners of capital thought, well, this is not representing good returns for our investment. So we were not attracting local investment, we were not attracting foreign investment. So he undertook these reforms to, in the first instance, remove the fuel subsidies and then also to remove the FX subsidies. And that's had a huge impact in terms of attracting investment into the country, but also spurring domestic investment. So if you look, for example, at our foreign reserves, which is now at about $40 billion and had dipped to the low 30s. So in answer to your question, it really is about creating a framework, an economic framework that matches returns with the risks taken. Again, if we speak to the central bank, we had this huge dislocation where inflation rates were much higher than the returns that investors were getting. So what did a lot of local people do? Instead, they would invest in dollars, for example, rather than invest in the real sector. But by increasing interest rates, though we know that that's had implications on the real sector, but it means that we begin to return to an environment of real returns, which is what investment will always require.
I think that's really clear, and we've seen, and we'll come back to you because we saw the confidence that the market showed when Nigeria launched the inaugural diaspora bond. I think it was set for $500 million. And we saw investors putting up $900 million. It was oversubscribed by almost double. But we'll come back to that so that you can just speak to how the Caribbeans, because there was a bond targeted at the diaspora, and I know a country like St. Kitts has huge diaspora population in the UK, in the US, across the Americas. So we'll speak to how St. Kitts and maybe other countries in the Caribbean can tap and in a creative financing framework as a diaspora bond. But Prime Minister, we are seeing, and championed by Professor Benedict Orama of Afri-Caribbean Bank, trying to drive the financial interrelationship between Africa, leveraging Afri-Caribbean Bank as a platform, and the Caribbean. I think just a few days ago we had the groundbreaking ceremony of the Afri-Caribbean Bank Trade Center to be built in Barbados. We have a rep office in Barbados. We're beginning to finance transaction. And I must say congratulations. I understand from my colleague who heads the office in Barbados that the first transaction was actually done in your country. And I think that's very commendable. That it means you are running ahead of your peers. But Prime Minister, first is how have you been able to get first the trust of Afri-Caribbean Bank to be able to put the first deal in your country? And how do you see greater collaboration? We have the African Development Bank, we have the African Finance Corporation, we have the Trade and Development Bank in East Africa, or the Shelter Africa. How can the Caribbean tap other African development banks so that we can have a greater convening power together with Afri-Caribbean to do more in the Caribbean?
Thank you very much. Let me say and recap on what you said, that St. Kitts and Nevis was the first to sign an MOU supported by the Afri-Caribbean Bank in the whole of the Caribbean. I got elected on August 5th, 2022. President Orama, Professor, and his team from Afri-Caribbean Bank came to Barbados in September of 2022. It was my first trip outside of St. Kitts and Nevis, and it was for my first bilateral, I would say, interaction as Prime Minister. I really took that trip because I wanted to meet Professor Orama. The story was a very excellent story, a story that was very intriguing, and I wanted to know, the Afri-Caribbean Bank, President Orama, why is he now coming to the Caribbean? So I went to the meeting and I listened to him, because I think the previous panelists spoke about something. They spoke about trust. Trust is very important when embarking on anything that has to do with finance, at a personal business level, much more at a country level. And so when President Orama came in, I went to Barbados and I listened to him carefully. I think he was excellent in the way that he presented and how he sold the story. He wrapped it in history, and in addition to that, he said words without tangible benefits would go nowhere. That's almost akin to a Bible verse that I learned when I was young. And after that, there was a private meeting set up between the leaders and President Orama. And from what I can remember, I may have been the only leader who sat in that private meeting with President at that time. And I think, of course, a new person coming, leaders will have, need time to really appreciate what this new person would be coming with. But I decided to go and listen to him. In talking to him more privately, I think I got to know his spirit and understand him more and say, okay, this is somebody maybe I can trust, meeting him. Just by interaction, listening to him, shaking hands, looking into his eyes. Those things that you do to know if you should at least start to trust this person. And all the positive signs were there. And then he asked that we sign an MOU, a non-binding MOU, so that he can say to his board that the Caribbean countries are serious. And that was the first MOU that I signed as Prime Minister. Again, because I am building the trust. And then President Orama came back again when we were in Bahamas for another event. And there he and I met again to strengthen the relationship even more. And then I invited him to St. Kitts. And he came to St. Kitts and he sat in my cabinet room and we had an excellent conversation. The very painting that I have behind of me in my cabinet room is a painting from President Orama. President Orama, I say all of that to show that it takes the effort. One has to come on a mission, and one has to understand, one has to be able to build that trust, and one has to be able to set a clear path as to how the relationship will develop. But again, it must also have tangible benefits, what you're talking about. And so just like we did that with Afri-Caribbean Bank, we can also do that with the other banks, because I think the other banks can see that the relationship between Afri-Caribbean Bank and the Caribbean, and St. Kitts and Nevis specifically, has been very productive and has been beneficial to both entities, the Caribbean as a whole and the Afri-Caribbean Bank as a bank. And I think the other banks can embark as a result of this great example that has been set.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. So clearly, you underscored the role of trust, mutual collaboration, and tangible benefits. And clearly, I'm sure yourself and your delegation, after this mission to Nigeria, we're hoping very much, and with the GMD of Aquarian, that in another year, we should be able to sign and tangible agreements, deals being closed, which will basically give fruits to this visit to Nigeria. As I was trying to say earlier, we saw Nigeria launch the diaspora bond, basically to tap liquidity from Nigerians in the diaspora in a first formal method, and it was oversubscribed in the first instance, and it was really commendable and gave confidence to the process. And I believe this is something that the Caribbean can do as they try to deepen access to finance, access to liquidity. What tips, what nuggets would you have to share for the Prime Minister, his delegation, around this diaspora bond that can help the CARICOM in doing something similar to tap liquidity from abroad?
Okay, now it's on. So, in terms of the diaspora bond, as we know, all countries such as ours have citizens out in the diaspora who are looking for investment opportunities back home. And certainly in our part of the world, we have people in the diaspora who have concerns that sometimes they send funding back home for various ventures, and they don't get the kind of returns they want. So that was one angle. The second is also having significant population out in the diaspora who want to partner with government, especially when they see government taking the right steps. So in terms of linking to the earlier conversations on the reforms and trust, that bond program was only possible after we'd undertaken the necessary reforms. Had we done it, say 18 months, or should I say, had the previous government done it before those key reforms, I'm not sure it really would have gained the kind of traction it did. And I think as evidence of that point is, in December last year, we also launched a Eurobond. And on that one, the target was, I think it was about $2.25 billion. And we got to the UK, we sat with the advisors the day before, and there was a question of, do we do a roadshow or don't we do a roadshow? And the view that was given was that over a period of time, we had been engaging with investors. They had a good sense of where we're at, where we were with the reforms, to position us not to to do a roadshow for that Eurobond. And true to form, we opened the Eurobond, and the initial demand was about $9.9 billion. So again, hugely oversubscribed. So I say that to say the importance of laying the ground by putting in the kind of economic framework that will build trust with those in the diaspora, and then also engaging with the investors, including the diaspora investors. So with all these different global events, World Bank, IMF spring meetings, UNGA, etc., there have been different engagements with Nigerians in the diaspora to ensure that when it came to a bond such as that, it could be successful, but also remembering the domestic investors. So there was a diaspora bond. It was open to investors in the country and also partnering with the financial institutions in the country, because they too will help to bring in the investment.
Thank you, Sanyade. And Prime Minister, just to, from your perspective, sitting as Prime Minister, political head, economic head, how have you supported the financial institutions in St. Kitts and Nevis, and how do you see the CARICOM doing better in terms of collaborating with other I know that we have the RBCs, the big banks from Canada, and the US banks, but how do you see the CARICOM creating a better framework to tap in African financial institutions who, for example, want to set up shop in the CARICOM? Access Bank, for example, I understand, are trying to set up shop in Barbados. But from your role as a political head and an economic head, how do you see this working?
Right, thank you very much. I think I like the idea that was presented before I get to the question on the diaspora bonds. We are launching our own bonds, and listening to her, it sparked an idea.
Beautiful.
And I would like to say this would help us tremendously.
Beautiful.
So when I'm on the road meeting my diaspora, I will also promote my bond. Thanks for that idea.
Yes.
Yes, so in St. Kitts and Nevis, we do have banks that are from outside St. Kitts and Nevis. But the largest bank in St. Kitts and Nevis is our own indigenous bank. Let me say, because again, the statement was made today, nobody is coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. In the 1970s, after England was about to leave St. Kitts and Nevis, the people were very poor, uneducated, just like the story here in Nigeria, of course. And so the then administration, we had a semi-independent system, political system, took the decision to start an indigenous bank. The bank was called the Penny Bank. For those of us who remember back then, when they used to have the pounds and so forth, they had what you call the penny. These are the very cents. So the majority of people worked in the sugar industry for very little. And so the foreign banks would not take their money because they consider their money to be too small and negligible for them to take their money and put in their banks. In addition to that, there was a significant amount of racism where the majority black people did not have the opportunity to access finance and access banks to bank or even to borrow. And so that, of course, would lead to further underdevelopment. But then there was a gentleman who had studied in England, and he returned to St. Kitts and Nevis. And together they formed what was called the Penny Bank. The objective was, we will take your pennies. And from the 1970s to now, that bank grew larger than all of the foreign banks in St. Kitts and Nevis. And today it is still the largest. Not only that, it became the largest indigenous bank in the whole OECS and one of the largest in the whole of the Caribbean, even though we were the smallest country. That is why it says size does not define you at all. And that says to us that we did not need to solely depend on them, that we could have done it ourselves, and we did it ourselves, and we lift ourselves up tremendously out of poverty. I gave that backdrop to say that we have experience in banking as a people. We understand the importance of banking. And so that is why I was open to welcome the Afri-Caribbean Bank. And we are open to welcoming any other bank from the continent. Let me say that our laws are such that will facilitate very easily banks from across the continent to come into St. Kitts and Nevis to set up. I will not speak to all of the specifics, but just to say that we facilitate. We have relationships with other banks, for example, that we have instituted as well. And the Afri-Caribbean Bank, I went to Parliament as the Minister of Finance, and I lead the debate on incorporating the Afri-Caribbean Bank as a bank in St. Kitts and Nevis, and that only took us about 2 hours. So that is an example to say to the other banks that St. Kitts and Nevis, we are open for business, and especially business from our African brothers and sisters right here on the continent.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and very well said. I think this panel has done a great job in basically detailing the role of finance and how critical it is to ensuring that we can create wealth for our people, drive economic emancipation. Prime Minister, one word that you have not held back is trust. The role of trust, the role of knowing who your partner is. And that's why, of course, Afrexim could do the first transaction in the CARICOM in St. Kitts. And Sanyade has also spoken around reforms, how it's critical for government to create reforms so that you can engender trust, going back to your trust again, so that when people are in the diaspora, they can trust you enough to invest back home in your bond and raise liquidity that can help develop the country. As we close the panel, and Sanyade, I'll like you so that the Prime Minister can have the last word. Sanyade, what's the outlook for financing? We've seen all that is going on in the world. There's a lot of nationalism. We're seeing the US wealth for US people, the US aid being cut. What's the outlook for Africa? And then maybe Prime Minister, you can speak to the outlook for the CARICOM.
I think the truth is it's very uncertain. I think if I'm to put one word to it, it is uncertain. And on that basis, there has the way one plans has to be different. Where you are, it certainly moves us more towards the whole concept of domestic resource mobilization, making sure that you're not dependent on funding from external parties, because we have, in the last few months, seen what we thought was unthinkable happen. And so it certainly, for me, it begs the question, what other sacred cows will be slayed over the coming weeks and months? So it moves us all towards greater precision with our planning, greater cooperation amongst like-minded partners, not just always looking to Big Brother. I think it's not just that they're saying nobody's coming to help us. I think the message is more categoric now, which is rise up yourselves. But we know that some other developed worlds didn't rise up individually. They rose up by partnering with others. So equally, it's us recognizing that we are going to have to, who are the natural partners. Clearly from this conference, we've already identified who the natural partners are, and begin to work together to ensure that together we rise up. Thank you.
Thank you. Prime Minister?
One of the reasons why I'm here today at this auspicious occasion, and we decided to come, it is because if we did not learn the lessons previously, I hope we have learned them now. It is important that we forge South-South partnerships. It's important that we seek different pathways for our economic and financial stability. The world's present uncertainty should be a lesson to all of us. And as my fellow panelists say, let us not look to Big Brother and Big Sister or whoever to save us. Let us save ourselves. So that is a message I take from her very strongly.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, Prime Minister, still one more word?
Just to answer your question across CARICOM, we were expecting to grow this year. Of course, now it is uncertain. We have heard certain pronouncements within the, coming from, for example, the United States of America, which we know will hit the Caribbean harshly in terms of the tariffs, in terms of what is expected to be placed on Chinese containers and so forth, because a lot of it go to Florida before it comes down into the Caribbean. And so we are having discussion. If those tariffs were to hit without a carve-out for the Caribbean, I can say that it will be devastating. And so we have to quickly look for different trade routes so that we can make sure that our economy can withstand whatever may come. And so we are pushing as hard as possible to establish those different alternatives while seeking to dialogue to see what can be a better outcome for all involved. That is a strong lesson, a serious lesson for all of us. When it comes to the USAID, as was mentioned, USAID was doing minimal stuff for us, so we won't hit as badly because of USAID. But when you come to trade and shipment and logistics, and there will be tariffs on those things would affect us severely. So I want us to understand that, and we'll see where the story goes in 1 or 2 months. However, CARICOM has met, and we are developing plans and strategies to protect the region as much and as far as possible. So I would like to say, as I wrap up, to thank all of you for your participation and for being here, and to thank my fellow panelists. I want to thank you. If I did not leave with anything, I have left with an idea. Okay. So I will be on the road selling the bonds to my diaspora, because our diaspora is a larger population than the inhabitants in the country itself, and they can afford, a great deal of them can afford this. And to say lastly, let us continue to work to make sure that the relationship and the reconnection between Africa and Caribbean is not just only about history and emotions and feelings. These things are very important. Do not put them secondary. But as President Orama from the Afri-Caribbean Bank said, there must also be tangible benefits. Let's invest in each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Can we have a resounding round of applause for him? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please let's make that applause for them a bit louder than that.